Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today, I wanted to talk about the do's and don'ts of reefing when setting up your first saltwater aquarium. If you're brand new to my channel and we haven't met yet, my channel's main focus is to help new reefers and share what I've learned since I've started reefing back in 2016. The hobby is constantly evolving, and there's always something new to learn. Whether you're a veteran or new to the hobby, I hope I can help you avoid some of the mistakes I've made so far. And if you enjoy videos and podcasts like this one, can you go ahead and smash that like button for me? Because I try to put in as much value as I can into these videos I make to help you out. And a small little tap or click really helps the YouTube algorithm recommend my videos to others in need. Well, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So the first thing you don't want to do is don't use a hang on the back filter. Now, there is actually a use, I would say, maybe for like a QT tank or something, or maybe if you're cycling rock in a 40-gallon breeder or something like that, instead of using a power head, you can go ahead and use a hang on the back filter. That's probably the only time I would actually use one. But other than that, I've got a couple laying around here, and honestly couldn't even tell you where they're at because I just don't use them. And the reason we really don't need a hang on the back filter is because your live rock and your sand houses all the beneficial bacteria that you'll ever need. Another hang on the back product that I don't recommend you use is a hang on the back skimmer. Basically, all of them are just garbage. Everyone that I've tried anyways. Now, I think there is one or two out there that's pretty decent, but overall, if you're going to use a skimmer, if you're new and that's pretty much all you can afford, just skip it. Don't waste your money on it. Wait until you have a bigger system that has a sump that you can actually invest in a higher quality cone skimmer, because those are going to perform way better than any hang on the back skimmer that's on the market today. Another bad idea that you don't want to do is use an old weak light. For example, if you have those little squiggly CFL bulbs, you don't want to use those. Or if you have just a cheap Amazon, like a par 38 light bulb, you don't really want to use those. The reason you don't want to use an old light is, after several months or even years, just depending on what kind of light you have, lights just won't be as strong as they used to be when they were brand new. And they won't have nowhere near the same spectrum that they once were when they were brand new. I started out in the hobby using metal halides because that's just pretty much what was the most popular back then, along with T5s. LEDs were still pretty new and nobody was really trusting them yet. I mean, there were a few people using them, and believe me, they were a lot of money too back then. Way more than what you see now. On the metal halides, you were supposed to replace them every 6 months to a year, just depending on what kind of bulb you have. And the reason for that is they just lose the power they once had, and the spectrum changes. Another mistake that a lot of people make when they're just getting into the hobby is they add pretty much all their fish that they want all at once, or, within a week's time or so. They'll go to the fish store, pick up a couple little clownfish or whatever. They'll have those. They'll say, hey, the tank looks empty. Let me go ahead and get another fish or two. They add them to there, and slowly, before you know it, your nitrates raise out of control, and even your ammonia starts to spike up because your tank's not cycled all the way. Then your fish start to die. So the proper way to do this is just add a fish or two at once. Give it a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks, or even a month, is better for the beneficial bacteria to kind of repopulate, reproduce, and catch up, so it can handle that bioload of all those fish. Now, this next one here is pretty much on the same line as the hang on the back filter. You don't want to use a canister filter for the saltwater aquarium hobby. It's great in freshwater because you can put all that biomedia in there, all your sponges and all that, just to help the beneficial bacteria reproduce and repopulate more quickly and a more abundance of them. But in the saltwater aquarium hobby, you don't really need a canister filter for two reasons. One, it's basically going to become a detritus trap, and all that junk and fish poop and everything is just going to stay in that canister filter, and it's going to be a pain to clean out pretty much every week because you're going to need to clean that thing out almost weekly. Two, it may even produce too much bacteria for your tank. If your tank doesn't have a super heavy bioload, then all that extra beneficial bacteria that it's creating is going to make your nutrients just plummet to zero. Your nitrates zero, your phosphates zero, and then shortly thereafter you're probably going to have a dinoflagellance outbreak, and you don't want that. I just had a battle with dinos for over 2 years, and I finally beat it a couple months ago. Trust me, it's a pain in the ass, and you don't want to go through that. So Don't use a canister filter, and keep your nutrients slightly elevated. There's also really no place for tap water in the hobby. You want to use clean, pure, fresh RODI water, which stands for reverse osmosis deionized water. You don't truly know what's going to be in your tap water. Some things, that are well known, like ammonia and chlorine, obviously they're in there. And since your pipes are copper, you guessed it, there will be copper in your tap water. All of these things, along with many other elements, should be avoided at all costs in the saltwater aquarium hobby. You only want to use fresh, clean RODI water, and you can get this from your local fish store, or you can buy an RODI filter online. It may seem like a steep price at first to invest in a RODI filter, but after all the time you spend and all the money you spend on buckets, going to the fish store, buying the water, loading them in your vehicle, unloading them, lifting up the buckets to put in your tank, changing the water and all that, it's a pain in the butt. It's a much better and cheaper option over the long run just to get a RODI filter. Pool filter sand or playground sand is silica based. This is not good for a reef tank. You want to make sure that you're buying aragonite sand. Just look online for a brand called Carib Sea, and they sell a lot of varieties of aragonite sand. The main reason you want to avoid using silica sand is silicates will promote cyano growth in your tank. Also, you don't want to use sand from your friend's tank to seed your tank to help it cycle faster. If you use the sand or even the rocks from a friend's tank, you're going to get all the pests and all the chemicals that your friend used. Don't add fish that you catch straight from the ocean. Don't keep fish you catch from your weekend fishing trip. They more than likely will have parasites and other health issues. If it's a really cool fish and you just can't live without it, I would set up a little quarantine tank, quarantine the fish properly. I would say for at least a month, maybe even 2 months, just to make sure nothing's wrong with that fish. And then put it in your tank. But don't catch the fish, take it home, dump it straight into your tank, because you're just going to kill your other fish if you do that. Honestly, I would just avoid it altogether. There's really no sense in taking that risk. There was one time I went fishing down in Destin, Florida, and we were catching bait before we went out to the actual fishing trip. And I caught a pretty cool little fish. And this is before I was even in the saltwater aquarium hobby, so I really had no idea what that fish was. But the deckhand told me that the fish was called a slippery dick. Now, it is a funny name and all, but it's a cool little wrasse. You can Google it, check it out. It's a cool fish. Now, if I would have been in the saltwater aquarium hobby, I guarantee I would have kept that fish and put it in my tank. Although, I don't think it is reef safe. One of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make is buying everything all at once. And what I mean by that is going to the local fish store, getting a tank, your rock, your sand, and your fish on the same day. You're just pretty much setting yourself up for a disaster from day one. You need to let your sand and your rocks sit in your aquarium and cycle. I recommend for at least a month or maybe even 2, just to get enough bacteria in your tank before you even think about adding a fish. Now, I know you can't just throw in a bottle of Fritz Turbo Start and pretty much in a day or 2 throw some fish in there and they're going to be fine, but I haven't personally done that myself. The last tank that I actually started up from dry sand and dry rock, I actually cycled it a couple months before I even threw my first fish in there. So I may try the Turbo Start one day, but until now, I'm just going to recommend that you let that tank sit, throw a bottle of Microbacter 7 in there, and let that tank sit a couple months before you even add any kind of livestock in there. Oh, and make sure to keep your lights off the whole time while you're cycling that tank. So I had so many don'ts in my mind that I was writing down. I actually have 3 bonus tips here for you. Don't buy from a coral flipper. And what I mean by that is someone who just buys a lot of corals, chops them up, puts them on frag plugs, and then sells them to whoever wants to buy them for the cheapest price, $5, $10, whatever. I mean, there are some decent flippers out there or garage sellers, so I'm not bashing anyone. I know several people who buy and flip corals. Just be aware, if you don't QT those corals that you buy, you'll probably have every pest known to man. Garage sellers and flippers are mainly just looking for a quick flip just to make some money, and they don't care if they infest your tank with pests, especially Aiptasia, bubble algae, and flatworms. Just because you can get a cheap coral on a Facebook auction doesn't necessarily mean it's the best idea. The second bonus tip I got for you is you don't want to use used rock or used sand. Don't make the mistake like I did on one of my tanks and buy live rock from Craigslist or, even your friends. You don't know what the issues that rock has been through. Maybe it was used in a QT tank with copper, or maybe that rock was in a tank that had super high nitrates and phosphates, and that person just decided to shut their tank down. That phosphate or nitrate could be trapped in that rock, and then you're going to put that in your tank, and you're going to be dealing with all the problems they had. The best recommendation I can give you on rocks or sand is to use dry rock and use live sand or dry sand. Either or is best. The last bonus tip I have for you is don't cycle with a fish. I mean, that's just cruel. I mean, do you really want to have your fish swimming around there with ammonia burning their gills, nitrite and nitrate hurting them? We've already reached the age of the bottle bacteria and ammonia cycling. It's super simple. You just add your bacteria, wait a little bit, add some ammonia, test, wait a little bit, add some more ammonia, and then, like with the Dr. Tim's method, Dr. Tim's one and only bacteria and ammonium chloride, the little kit he sells, you can have your tank pretty much up and running within 2 weeks without a fish. And if anybody's recommending to use a fish, maybe a LFS or your friend, they're just a straight up dick. Tell them I said that.